And she was like finger wagging. And she said, this church is a welcoming church. And I said, well, it may be for you and to you, but I know it's not for many others. And I knew it was not because wherever I go to lead worship, I don't get locked in the vestry. Please don't take me into the vestry. I stay in the car park or outside on the 4 drive saying hello, welcome, how are you? And people will say, I'm coming back to church. This is my first time in 3 or 4 weeks. Actually, I'm nervous of coming back to church because I do not know how I will be greeted. Yeah? Or I've never been to church before and I'm terrified because that doorstep, which we think is flat, is like trying to climb up here to go through the church for the first time. And I remember that. So I became a Christian about 25 years ago in a service of Holy Communion. I started going back to church through a redundancy program. Me and Linda, my wife, we both lost our jobs simultaneously. I knew nothing of God. I'd been brought up in a small village in West Riding of Yorkshire and went to junior church when I was about 5, 6, 7, 8. Then stopped going until I was 30. We ended up living in a Methodist church. I had no idea it was a Methodist church. To me, it was a church. You know, what's denomination? You talked about Pentecostalism and Catholic Church. I'd got no idea. This was a Methodist, and we were living in the church. And I said to my wife on the first weekend, we moved in on April the 1st. That's important. So I know God has a good sense of humour. And I said to Linda, my wife, that was Saturday, shall we go to church tomorrow morning? And she said, no. I'm not a woman of dual standards. I've always said I'm not going to church, and we only got married in church to please me. And I got no idea why I wanted to get married in church at all. Linda said, let's live together. I'm not bothered about getting married. Let's go to a registrar's office, or let's do it in a few years. And I just felt somehow a bit like Samuel, not understanding. You know, when he goes to Eli 3 or 4 times, and Eli says, "No, go back to bed. Oh, go back to bed. Yeah, don't bother me until the morning." And I went to church the following morning, and nobody explained anything. But somehow God was pulling me. Thank God, amen. To go to church more often. And still, every week, nobody had ever explained really what was going on. And it was a church of about 200 people, and everybody went forward for Holy Communion, and everybody came back. And I would go Sunday after Sunday, and I'd try and sit there, and somebody would say, "You can't sit there." Yes. That's a hyacinth chair. So I'd sit there, "Oh no, you can't sit here." Yeah. So I'd say, "You can't, well, there can I sit?" Yeah. And nobody ever, and I never took Holy Communion. I've got no idea what it was. I'd never heard about it at school or at college. Yeah. And nobody in church said, "Well, we see you're not taking communion. And can we explain what it is?" Nobody ever said that. No. And I'm screaming out for understanding. You remember when you were at school and you were never picked for the football team or the hockey club? You're always the last child in the queue. Why does nobody pick me? Well, that's real in our churches. So we're part of a wonderful thing called a connection. Yeah. I don't know if any of you have seen this magazine. I've brought lots of them, and I can email all of these things to you later. And it reminds us that we're part of a wide group of 5,000 plus churches in Britain, and then the global family as well. I've brought some stuff in an envelope for you. Please take it. Thank you. And I want to remind you that our calling is much of what we've discussed this morning. It's about worship. That's central, but that's not the easy way in sometimes for people that are looking for a faith journey. Learning and caring, where do we do that? How wonderful is it that you meet like this? Because not many fellowships meet like this. Yeah. You know, the Birmingham District Zimbabwean Fellowship doesn't really meet like this. Join in with the local preachers generally. and in the London district where I was before. Then there's service. Is it service just to us? Yeah, we know each other. Let's just service ourselves. We'll be nice with each other. Yeah. But what about all the people out there who are crying and hurting? And then about evangelism. You know, I see people in my world that, I don't know if you remember the old cartoons of Tom and Jerry, and there'd be the wolf chasing the chicken. Yeah. And you see the picture of the chicken in the wolf's eyes, because he was focused on the chicken. And I see sometimes people that are keen on evangelism, they've got these big E's in their eyes, and they're not bothered about the person, they're bothered about telling them their story. Yeah. And actually, Jesus listened to your story. Or the woman by the well, he listened to her story. Or the man in the tree. I'm coming home for dinner with you tonight, so I can listen to your story. Come down and let's do this journey together. Yeah, amen. So, I'm David. I'm a funny kettle of fish. I love Christ, of course, but I'm very interfaith in my nature. Very wide and very inclusive. And I was in Chester for a while. Anybody know Chester? Yes. Yes, drop dead gorgeous, isn't it? Yeah. It's like a bigger version of Stratford-upon-Avon. Stratford-upon-Avon's got black and white buildings this high. Chester's got black and white buildings that high. But it wasn't enough for me. And even the tourist board statistics said we've got inclusion in our city 0.04% diversity. I never saw anybody have diversity. Never, ever, never. The only diversity that would be in Chester would be when I invited students from Queen's Foundation in Birmingham to come up and spend a week with me in Chester. People from India, people from other parts of the world. And my church in Chester said, and the circuit said, "Thank you, David, you have brought the world to Chester." Yeah. After 2 years, I felt God called me away from Chester to be in an area of greater diversity. And if you're ever part of the stationing program, what you're meant to do is to tick 5 churches that sound as though you might fit in that quirky space. Well, I couldn't tick 5 spaces because none of them talked about diversity. This is the Methodist Church in Britain. You know, mostly stuff is written by white British people, and they don't give the chances to the Ghanaians and the Caribbeans and the Zimbabweans and the others to comment in these things. So my district chair from Stoke and Chester went to the London chairs meeting, and they said, "Why has David not said he'd go to this church?" And my district chair said, "Because he feels passionately called to a challenging area that's diverse." So they said, "Well, why doesn't he, you've got to please keep this like what we call it inbound, or use it sensitively." So they said, "Well, why is he not going to Egmonton Methodist Church?" And so my district chair said, "Well, we've both gone through all of these together." He was very supportive of me. And it doesn't speak of diversity. And they said, "Well, it's the most diverse church in London, probably." Well, why doesn't that bloody profile say that then? Why doesn't it talk about diversity and inclusion and people from Ghana and Sierra Leone and Nigeria and wherever else it might be? It just talked from a posh part of the London district perspective. Yeah? Because the people that wrote it never went over the A10 to visit the church. They stayed in their leafy lanes in the rich part of Enfield and the home counties. So I went. To begin with, on my first day there, I went quietly. I'll go and have a look. I'll do a bit of espionage. I walked up the road. Where's the Methodist Church? Where is the Methodist Church? Where is the Methodist Church? And I'm in the right address. And then I turned round when I'd gone 100 metres past it to look. I must have passed it. And there it was, on the side of the road. It looked like a derelict pub. Honestly. No signage on the front, facing the road, none at all. A big tree blocking the whole view. I love trees, but you know. And rubbish in black bags all up the front of it. And it's only when I walked past it and looked back, I could see they'd made the old side the front. But if you're on the bus, you wouldn't have seen the side, because you're looking for the front. Yeah. So I went in, I just got a t-shirt on and some jeans. I thought I'll try and blend in. I was the only white person in the place. So, you know, I didn't really blend. So I was a bit like a latte coffee, you know. There's a bit of cream here and the rest is that. And so they started singing and I'd sat here. I thought I'll sit near the choir. And the choir all stood up to sing. So I stood up to sing. And the whole church burst out laughing, because the church didn't stand, because it was their normal pattern and tradition, that the choir would always sing and lead the first chorus. But they didn't tell that to people.
They let you stand out.
Yeah, so nobody said, oh, you're new here, aren't you? I mean, it's clear I was new. Nobody said, oh, well, we have the choir and, you know, come and sit with us and we'll show you what to do. So I've always had a heart, because I only became a Christian in that community service. I've always had a heart for those people out there, or those people are not familiar with our patterns, and are not understanding what a faith journey is like. And the church often is the worst place in the world to encourage people. Yeah. I say that with some experience. So, coming up to the Birmingham district, again, I couldn't tick any boxes. My heart felt, not that I needed to be in a particular church context, but I actually needed to be, I felt called to be nearer to my wife Linda, geographically, because when I'd gone to this circuit and that circuit and that circuit and Queens and that, Linda had always stayed at home with our children and her elderly parents taking care of them. And my churches used to say, particularly in London, they'd say, Rev, you're really good, but your wife is even better. Yeah, because she let you come to us. Yeah, hallelujah for your wife. So I've been really blessed and fortunate. I went to Jamaica with one of my Methodist friends, Reverend Stephen Mullings, that used to be in the Birmingham district, lovely guy. And when I was there, my mobile phone rang, and it was the chair of the Birmingham district. At that time, it was a guy called Bill Anderson. I don't know if any of you knew him. And I was at a funeral in Jamaica, and so I quietly drifted away from the funeral. And it was Bill saying, hi, David, this opportunity has just come up, we'd love you to come. Come and have a conversation with us, please, when you get back. So I went back, and I was invited to go to an exploratory meeting at the National Exhibition Centre about chaplaincy at the National Exhibition Centre. And it looked great. Anybody been to the National Exhibition Centre?
Yeah.
Yeah? Mary Berry's, BBC, good food, gardening, all of these exhibitions. They get 7 million visitors a year. And I went, and actually on the way home in the car with Bill, I was feeling this was not a good fit. Part of it was a good fit, but actually, in my head, I was saying, it's too narrow, it's too narrow, it's too narrow. But I didn't voice this out. Bill, who was driving the car to go and have bread roll and the soup at the Manx, he said, without me articulating my concern, he said, David, think of the wider picture. It was just as though God heard me here in my heart and spoke into Bill's heart, and he articulated, and that's all he said, all the way home for half an hour. Think of the wider picture. So I went for the interview at the NEC, and it wasn't like a circuit meeting where you meet the polite circuit stewards and you might have a cup of tea in a chipped mug or a cheap biscuit. Some churches give you a nice fairy cake or Mr. Kipling fancy, but not all churches are gregarious and helpful and welcoming when you go on a visit. So I went, and there was the HR director, the union rep, the visitor centre manager, the ecumenical officer, the district chair, somebody representing the local community. And they said, right, let's go up into the boardroom for a meeting. So I said, well, do you think we could pray before we go? And they said, oh, yeah, well, I suppose we could. Hello? This is a significant meeting. So we had a prayer and we all went up to the boardroom. Lots of glass and chrome and very posh. And they said, well, tell us something, David. And I said exactly what I just said to you. As if I'm appointed chaplain of this space, the last thing I will do is send anybody to church.
Yeah.
And I could see some people go, oh, what's this?
What's that?
And I could see their faces. It was like they're bitten on a piece of strong onion. So I said, because I would want to be there with them to make sure they had a friendly reception. I've been to too many churches where I've been told, you can't park there. You go to the church, it's got 10 doors on the outside of the building. None of them say this is the main door. Yeah, even as a minister, I go to churches and I'm knocking on all the doors, persevere. But if you've never been to church forever, you ain't going to do that. Make sure your signage is clear, like, welcome here, through this door. So that's why I meet people outside the church doors. Sometimes it frightens people. In Chester, one of our churches was right by some of the big hotels in Chester. And I'd be on the street in my clerical collar and black shirt and saying, morning. And people would be like we are with our back, they'd be walking up and down like this with their trolleys. And you could see some of them say, oh, the vicar's on the street. But I had some amazing conversations outside the church walls. So, keep an eye on the time. Wind forward to being at Edmonton. First Sunday came, it was Holy Communion. I'm a sacramental presbyter because I became a Christian in a sacramental service. John Wesley confirms it as a converting ordinance. Yeah? So I know it's authentic. And nobody can take that away from me. I was lost in a cloud of mystery, spirit and God. And when I went down to this community service where I became a Christian, they'd actually wrapped up all the bread and the wine, like we do. Like it's a dead parrot or something embarrassing, rather than leaving it open for us to think about. And they wrapped it up, and I ran down, I just felt God say to me, I love you too. And they had to take off the sheets to give me the bread and wine. And it was embarrassing. I could see the embarrassment on their face. They weren't glad. They were saying, what's this? They weren't saying, oh, hallelujah, he's coming for communion. They were like, oh, this ain't normal. So I arrive at Edmonton. Everything I'm telling you is true. First Sunday service, communion. Probably 200 people in church to come and look at the new minister. You know what it's like, when the new guy's coming, let's go and see. He won't be as good as the old guy. We'll see him out, We'll tolerate him for a few years, or her. And so I then asked the community students to come forward. Bearing in mind, this is a black majority church, beautiful. All the communion stewards were white. There were only 5 white people in the church, but 4 of them were communion stewards. Hello. hello. So I said to the communion stewards afterwards, the one that wanted the conversation, I said, that will never happen again. James was already there. His name was David. So it'll never happen again. Lovely, gentle lady, but misunderstood, liberating people and engaging and sharing with people. So she said, oh, well, you'll upset people. So I said, well, I'm awfully sorry. They'll need to be upset, and I'm perfectly happy to go and have a conversation. So I got home, and I could see there was a message on my answer phone through the glass door. The door was open. It was one of the other white communion stewards, who wasn't in church, saying, I hear you're making changes. The service had only finished half an hour ago. So he said what his name was. I looked on the pastoral list. I didn't even go in and have a cup of tea or a pee. Yeah. I jumped back in my car. I drove round to their house, and I knocked on the door. Yeah. I am a representative of the Methodist Church. Whatever people think of me, whether I'm tall, fat, thin, small, old, young, still and foremost, all the time, I'm a Methodist minister representing the Methodist Church that believes fundamentally, absolutely in inclusion. Yeah. So the lady, the wife, said, oh, you must be our new minister. Yes, I am. Oh, her husband was in the lounge. She didn't say welcome or anything. She knew the phone call had been made. So I went in the lounge, and the man, this is no word of a lie at all, sat like this. Sat on his bottom, and he never lifted his head. I could have been the man from the moon. Honestly. Yeah. And I said, I hear you've got a concern. We believe in diversity, 6-year terms of office and that sort of thing. Good practice. He said, we were elected to do this. Hello, the Methodist Church doesn't understand and believe in election or being elected. And the normal pattern is that once you've been in office for 5 years, you're looking for somebody else to come and share it with you, so that you can dovetail in and then dovetail out. The next day, Tuesday, I got a few letters through my door, first-class mail, saying we resign as communion stewards. Wow. The biggest part of me said, thank God, hallelujah. I'd rather have no communion stewards if their heart is not inclusive, if their heart is not servant-led, if their heart isn't really valuing that bread and that wine. So I said, particularly to the Ghanaian fellowship group, who really didn't come into church very often at all, I said to them over the weeks, if you don't come into church, please rest assured, when you have your Ghanaian fellowship meeting after normal church, and you don't arrive until 5 minutes before your meeting, so that you don't need the rest of the church, rest assured, I'm coming into you. I'm coming every Sunday that you have a meeting, because we need to do this together. Yes. So I said, who is on the church council? I've got a script here, but I'm not following it. So I said to the Ghanaian fellowship, who's on church council? Who comes to church council? They all sat on their hands. Nobody came to church council. I used to dream of a worship consultation meeting, which we heard of twice this morning. Never had one. Where was the church council? I said. Guess where it was? You know where it was.
Someone's house.
Someone's house.
Yes.
With the man and the woman that rang me 10 minutes after the service finished to say they were not happy. It was in their house.
Yes.
All the decisions were made there.
Yes.
And they've got a tiny North London house, so it only fitted the white people. Really, honestly. After a few weeks, several of the Ghanaians and the Caribbeans said, we might want to look at early communion stewards, but we're terrified of our ankles being bitten. Because they come and complain to us, anything we do. They won't let us have keys. Oh. We can't be local preachers.
Yes.
They don't let us have our jalrofi rice or rice and peas or quite smelly. They had to pay for a community hall down the road when they had Ghanaian celebrations. Hello, we've got a church hall that's as big as twice this size. But they were spending £500 to use a bloody space down the road. So I said, never again. We were just blossoming with people. Then I could see that our young adults were being not truly encouraged, because they'd always been pushed out of church. So I said to one of the young women called Melissa, why don't you start a young people's group, YPF choir? So they did, and they started it, and I'd go to their rehearsals quietly, and I'd go there, and they'd all be singing like this. Like that. They were drop dead gorgeous, but singing like that. So I said, I'm a white British bloke. So I said, come on, why don't you just move around a bit?
Shake your voice.
Don't be like telegraph poles. Don't be British. Just chill out a bit.
That's power.
12 months later, they opened the conference worship with 35 young Caribbean and Ghanaian young adults. And they all went out to buy blue shirts and blue dresses, blue shoes, ask them in the London district. Anybody who went to that conference will never ever forget them. And they looked drop dead gorgeous. Our Saturday and Sunday worship joined in through the intranet on a screen in church. Mums and dads and grandparents and aunties and school friends came into the church to watch their family on this big screen. Everybody was in tears. We did a lot of crying at Edmonton. And Melissa and the other younger people, and the music was being played by Paul Wood, Judith knows Paul, and others. And Melissa said, sometimes when you go to a big conference, you go with timidity, don't you? I've got to say the prayers, or I've got to read a psalm, or I'm full of nerves. But because we'd said chill out, like move in your body, and they're all drop dead gorgeous in these blue things, blue clothes, like they're up here and there. They were so gorgeous. Melissa said, morning conference, we've come to help you worship with confidence and integrity and value and worth. And now some of those young people are worship leaders, local preachers, and training to be ministers. And older local preachers in that area would come to me and say, Rev, I am a local preacher. But I find it very difficult. Because I'm always being told what to do.
Yeah.
I say, well, ignore them. Be you. God didn't call Mrs. Smith with a wagging finger, or Mr. Brown with the grumble and the complaint. He called you to be you, exactly as you are, with your life experience and value and worth, to preach the word of God.
Amen.
To all places, to all people at all times.
Amen.
Not picking and choosing, but in all places and all times. And those preachers, well, they breathed in of the Spirit, and for the first time in their lives, in a worship context, they became them. God inspired, breathing God's words to God's people. So, in my job in the Methodist Church, I'm what's called a district officer. That means that I'm outside the church walls 24/7. I do not have a church. Yeah, it's a good model. I've spoken at the London District about it in their Moving Stories programme. I'm outside the church walls 24/7. I'm meeting people here, there and everywhere. I'm responsible for chaplaincy at the NEC, the ICC, International Conference Centre, the Arena Birmingham, where Ariana Grande plays and others, where there's 18,000 people. And I sit in management meetings with the key management people. I wear my clerical collar. I am their chaplain. They love me to bits. I passionately love them and they know I love them. I inherited a prayer room that was only frequented by a category of the community, and that was Muslim men. Well, this was my prayer room. I'm the chaplain. So I went in and said, hey, good morning. Yeah. And I went and got some, I went to the Islamic faith supply shop in Borstal Heath in Birmingham. And I walked into the Islamic supply shop in my clerical collar, and the guy behind the counter was on his mobile phone, and he saw me come through the door, and his mouth just dropped.
If he goes on the street again.
And I think if you could even say, hey, you're in the wrong shop. So when he finished talking, I said, I'd love these prayer mats, please, because I'm the chaplain for the NEC group, and I want to make it a welcoming space for everybody, and also our Muslim men and women. So I got bags full of prayer mats, and he said, because of your story, I'll give you 20% discount. And employees who have a Muslim faith in the NEC, one of them a while ago came to me, a few years ago now, came to me and he came and sat down in the chaplaincy office. So I said, oh, hello, good morning. How can I help you? And he said, you can't actually. I said, oh. And he said, I just want to tell you that you being here is wonderful. You've liberated us as Muslim men and women that work here. You've given a value to our faith position like nobody else has, and we know that you love us and you treat us the same as everybody else. Thank you so much. So as I walk around the floors, they say hi, good morning, hello, how are you? People might hug me if we've talked about a bereavement in the past. Just a couple of years ago, a supervisor brought two people to me, another supervisor and a young man. So I said, please take a seat. And I could tell their faces were somber. And I said, how might I help? And they said, well, this young man's girlfriend just died. She committed suicide. And just listening. Chaplains listen. I'm speaking a lot now because you've asked me to speak, but chaplains listen and listen and listen and listen, and then continue listening.
Yeah.
So I could tell that this young man was a Muslim young man. So I said, "Are you going to the funeral?" And he said, "No, we've been asked not to go. The family have said they only want blood family to be there." And he was in tears. And he said, you know, she was so well loved. The supervisor said she was so well loved. Everybody loved her, a Muslim lady. So I said, well, could we hold a reflection service? You know, somewhere in the NEC, we'll find a space. And they said yes. I spoke to HR. They said absolutely. So 75 people came to that reflection service. We had a beautiful photograph of her, flowers, a lit candle, and I chose readings from the Quran that talked about love. And I also used 1 Corinthians 13 about love. And I said to the young man, is there anything in particular that you'd like me to do or say when this day comes? And he said, no, I trust you to do the right thing. That ricocheted around the National Exhibition Centre that the chaplain will do this. So people say, hi David, hi David, hi. I have no idea who they are. But the tom-toms, like those drums, send signals to other people. Yeah. And so at the ICC, at the International Conference Centre, the National Association of School Workers and Teachers, they'll say, we're coming for a 3-day conference, will you do our Sunday worship for us? Yes, absolutely. 35, 40 people come to that, and they say, we wouldn't come if this service wasn't offered. Do I keep that to myself? Do I keep that quiet? I don't. I tell the management that this chaplaincy facility brings business into the business. Yeah. You will lose business if you don't have an active chaplain. So for some events, some schools will say, is there a prayer room available? My automatic answer is yes. How many people might we bring? They might say 6 buses of people. So then I say we need another prayer room. So we develop pop-up prayer rooms. So if there's a space in the place, we've got banners like this, Bibles, Qurans, Torahs, and we take them across with prayer mats, and we welcome everybody and anybody. Most of what we heard over the last day was about stuff in church. I'm trying to encourage you about stuff outside the church walls. With broad-based community, with the mums and the dads and those who have been silenced for donkey's years because nobody ever listens to it, and even the church does not listen. Somebody needs help and they go to the church, the bloody door's locked. Which door is it? Where's the telephone number? Sometimes it's just scrubbed off the notice board. Or it's got the old minister from like 3 times ago. So they'll phone for Cleopas and it'll be Reverend Paul from 20 years ago. It's like, what are we doing as church? And you have a responsibility in this. If you are not at those church councils, or if you're not in those stewardship meetings, or if you're not in those worship consultations meetings, how on earth is the church going to hear what you've got to say? Because in your worship leading and your local preaching capacity, you are representatives also of the Methodist Church, just like me. Yeah, just like me. And your authentic story is important. Yeah? So you must speak it.
Yeah.
In social justice world, I mix with a lot of Muslims, Hindus and Sikhs, people with no faith, homeless mums and dads in bed and breakfast places. There's no breakfast. It should really be called B, not B&B. But because we're British, we say homeless people staying in bed and breakfast. We say they're on holiday in Blackpool or Bournemouth. Isn't it lovely? Well, no, it ain't lovely because there's damp all down the walls. There's no breakfast, and there's 6 people in the room where it should only fit 1 mum and dad, or 2 people. So how do those stories impact on us when we're developing our worship? If it's not grounded in the local community, we're like the clanging cymbals.